This is your City Council Roundup, a recap of what's happening at City Hall with John Ongaro. The views expressed in this program are solely of those of the host and not necessarily those of the radio station or its partners.
Before we get to last night's City Council meeting, last week's edition of the City Council Roundup sparked some feedback I'd like to address, and we need to cover a couple of things. In last week's commentary, I began with some social media commentary about Thunder Bay Art Gallery and a correction to some misinformation regarding the city's contribution to the project. About $5 million is the city's portion of the construction. And in saying that, I mentioned that local taxpayers are not paying for the building at all. It's just a small portion. And that the city's contribution a few years back was very small and compared to the over $50 million required to build the building. The rest of the funds come from fundraising, a variety of grants, and other levels of government. Well, that last part, I received a bunch of emails and texts questioning if I knew that government money is still taxpayers' money. Well, of course I know that. Yeah. Yes, but it's not just local taxpayers' money. If I didn't make that clear, yes, your taxes to the province and the federal government are still your taxes, but your taxes federally and provincially also pay for highways in southern Ontario and bridges on the east and west coast, et cetera, and will also be included in Thunder Bay Art Gallery funds from other levels of government. They're not just coming from Thunder Bay and just all taxpayers in Thunder Bay. Taxpayers across the province and across the country will also be kicking into that. My commentary was only about local municipal taxes, that's all. That's what we cover in this little segment, and that's what we discuss, but I appreciate the feedback. Although some of it was a little on the nasty side. Comes with the territory of this job. For the ones that were a little nasty, might I suggest the authors use spell check and grammar check the next time they send an email. Now on to last night's meeting. Some interesting things on the agenda, including TBATEL's annual general meeting, the reports along that, tackling homelessness encampments in the city, and, of course, the councilors got a raise. But before you freak out, relax on that one. The meeting, scheduled to start at 6:30. At 6:50, the councilors and some admin came into the room. At 6:55, they were gone again, back into closed session. Kind of a rough start and a long start. Glad I got a coffee at 7:20. Well, it was 0-0 in the Leafs and Bruins game, and number 34 didn't break a sweat yet halfway through the first period. At 7:29, the Leafs scored. See, what I'm doing here is I'm filling the time because they were still...
That's multitasking, John.
14 seconds later, the Leafs, by the way, tied it up. And then at 7:49, Boston got the go-ahead goal, and they got caught standing around again. There was eight seconds left in the first. At 8:07, the meeting started.
Oof.
With a couple of discussions about the AGM for TBATEL. Acting mayor last night was Councillor Rajni Agarwal. The votes for TBATEL chair were put forward. Scott Potts was approved for another term. And the committee of the whole started at 8:11. By the way, the Leafs scored at 8:44 to tie it up. Anyway, the long review and discussion over the 2023 annual safety review report was a interesting discussion. It is an incredible amount of money. Safety, providing an overview of corporate injury stats, safety programming, and claim costs information for 2023. The costs are enormous. Admin says we're in the same position as most other municipalities. WSIB budget is significant each year, and there's a lot of work to do to keep people safer, to ensure the mental health of all city employees going forward. The work is ongoing, but the costs are extremely high, and that led to some interesting conversation. Next on the list was the councilors' raise. Relax, everybody. It's 1.05%, half the rate of inflation. The City Council Remuneration Committee reviewed this years ago, and they reviewed the cost across the cost of councilors across the province. It doesn't happen on a schedule. Last time we talked about this was in 2018. So before you get all upset about them giving themselves a raise, that led to the council composition discussion back then, which is underway right now. In the meantime, the longer we wait for these small increases for city council salaries, the further we fall behind. Years ago, there were enormous increases in cost of councillors, but as Councillor Benz pointed out last night, the gradual increase is a good thing. It really doesn't work out to that much. City councillors went from $32,481 a year to $32,822 a year. That's a difference of $341 per year. I think we can afford that. The mayor went from $98,805 to $99,842. That's a difference of about $1,037 a year. Yeah, we can afford that too. So before questioning it, the increase is about $28 a month for councillors. That's $14 a check before taxes. Kind of makes you wonder why we even bother, but it is part of the plan. 1.05%. The motion carried. Only Councillor Pascalino was the only one that was against.
Interesting.
Next.
Okay. Huh.
The dominating part of the meeting that took several hours was the report brought to City Council on designated encampments in the city. It's one of the most polarizing issues facing our city. Year after year, the tents start popping up, and the amount of tents that start showing up in encampments begins to grow. There's already a series of brand new tents at the Cam River Park on the curve of Simpson Street and Arthur Street. There are 3 or 4 already up there, and we're not even at the end of April yet. This report that was brought to council last night outlined that recommendations are coming with more defined areas for encampments, including restricted areas for these encampments. They went on to talk about other municipalities and what their rules on encampments are. And next thing you know, councillors were getting very upset. They thought that last night, administration was bringing back a plan for organized encampments and specific areas, and found out that the administration is still in the investigation stage. A very frustrated Councillor Gertuga asked point blank, what do I tell the constituents? What's going to change from this report? And the answer was nothing. We're still working on it. This is a big job. The human rights approach is, of course, the biggest part of this. Human dignity and what these people need in order to get by night after night in a tent and an encampment is something that we need to talk about. But council was expecting a report with specific designated areas last night. That led to some fairly harsh criticism of administration again. Here we go again. It seems councillors, again, misunderstood their motion from last year. They went on to say that they've been waiting over a year and nothing has happened, and they've got nothing to tell the residents. Well, City Manager Norm Gale acknowledged the frustration of the councillors and of the community and said very specifically something you've heard before. We report back as to how we were directed. Direction was to have community consultation last year and better understanding of the feasibility and designated encampments. That was the original resolution, and it had been honored that. Then there was discussions about staffing issues, and it's not a staffing issue, and it's not a budgetary issue. It's the ability to fill positions for these people to do the work. It's a tough situation because, as City Manager Gale pointed out more than once last night, the city does not have jurisdiction over this issue. It is not a municipal issue. Councillor Gertuga pushed back and said, quote, he doesn't buy it, and the councillors are working hard too, and we were expecting more from the report. Councillor Benz said that we sent you away to better understand encampments and options for designated sites. So he understands why everybody is frustrated, but we have the accountability with the community. It could lead to violence. It could be all kinds of issues with these encampments, and now we're going to be sitting on it for another year. Well, that then became the back and forth. Why in this report wasn't included designated sites for encampments? Well, there's some learning to do here. Designated sites for encampments cannot be regulated and cannot be forced on the people who are setting up tents. You can't tell them where to go. You can't move them from place to place. It's a human rights issue. Last year, 167 people, it was the peak of people living in these encampments. Now the city is doing their best to clean up the garbage, providing portable toilets for some of these places. The financial portion that the city throws behind this is insufficient to keep doing the work, especially with the rising number of people that are in these areas. We don't offer or deliver social housing, said City Manager Norm Gale. That's the provincial and federal government. He's right. Now, how many locations are we talking about? What should we do? Should there be just one? Would one mega location be sustainable? Probably not, says the city, because now the question becomes, what if people don't want to live there with other people? What if we don't want to be there with other people? That people according to their survey, choose locations to be away from others for safety and other reasons. So they will likely look at multiple locations. This discussion went on, and that brought us to the 11 o'clock resolution, and we continued the discussion. Just after 11 o'clock, Councillor Gertuga brought forward an amendment to the report and wants answers now, sooner rather than later, for options for managing encampments and rules around them. He asked for a specific date of June 24th for the new report with specific sites listed for council to consider. Other councilors jumped on that and kept adding to the report. What about this? Let's add this. What about washrooms? And on and on and on, to a point of, what about running water? What about Wi-Fi? All of these things adding to the report. Well, that amendment was passed very quickly. And City Manager Gale reminded the councilors that having 2 months for this report is not actually 2 months. It needs to be entered into the system, put into the agenda. It's only a couple of weeks for an enormous amount of work to do. They are going to do their best. The motion, as amended, was carried. Well, that brought us to the end of the meeting, which was about 12:15, and there was a lot of discussion about these encampments. And I just want to touch on this quickly so that we're all on the same page. There's a ton of opinions out there on what should be done with these encampments. The problem is all of the opinions are without understanding the laws and the abilities of the city, the responsibility of the provincial and federal government. I read a few times last night on a bunch of posts, hey, why not move these people to the old LPH site? There are a lot of rooms there, tons of space. Well, that's not our building. That keeps coming up over and over again. But the LPH site with all of those rooms is not ours. It belongs to the province. I also read enforce the bylaws, especially about squatters' rights and where people are and outdoor fires. Well, that's fine. But are we going to put our bylaw officers in charge of telling people to pack up? What happens if they don't? That puts them at risk too. And the last part to understand in all of this, especially where the designated encampment areas are concerned, there is no way to tell people where to camp out. There's no way to force them to go where they don't want to go. But remember that this situation is not unique to Thunder Bay. It's a housing issue. It's a mental health issue. There are financial issues everywhere. It's not just us. It's part of a way bigger social problem that unfortunately is a lot bigger than just the city of Thunder Bay. Provincial and federal governments need to come to the table to work together to find solution for the social issues first. It's a team approach. And it seems to me that this team is not on the same page. And in the meantime, more and more people are hurting, and more people require the basics of human dignity. It's not just a Thunder Bay problem. It's a problem with how those that have can't relate to those that don't.
Well said, John. My question, if we can just backtrack, this discussion last night at council.
Over 3 hours.
And forgive me if I have missed something here. Why was this not maybe discussed in the winter? Or was this pushed back again? Because why is now a report coming toward the end of June? Because is something even going to be done by this summer or early fall? And here we are again, back to square one. Why wasn't this discussed prior to now?
It's a fair question.
So something could have been in place by now.
It's a fair question. And there are a lot of keyboard warriors and experts that have all kinds of opinions on this too. You have to understand that the team that's working on this in the administration has an enormous amount of work to do to figure this out. It really comes down to a handful of people that were reporting last night. And if you have questions like that, which is a fair question, you need to watch the meetings to get the answers to those questions. And the answers to those questions, albeit fair and well thought out and extremely well researched, is really the limitations of what we can do is really the problem. And that's what councilors weren't understanding last night. We can only do so much. Thunder Bay can't just write a blank check and house all these people and clean up encampments and kick people out. At the same time, we have to consider that there are people that are living in these spaces that are suffering. We need to stop making it about not in my backyard. And that came out a bunch of times last night. Councillor Pascalino was scolded more than once because he went into detail about a certain individual that he shouldn't have and that he was creeped out by it and on and on. Okay, a lot of people have these feelings. There are a lot of scared people going through these encampments or in these encampments that are close to their houses. Yeah, that is completely justified. However, there is a human rights issue. One of the things that came back last night, what about the human rights of the residents and the ability to have a safe home on your own and keeping these people away? These people are not in this situation because they want to be. And we can only do so much. There's a little bit of compassion and kindness that's needed here. I get it. And I absolutely get that it is scary for some, and it's problematic in places like McVicker Creek, which is next to condos, and it is a scary place sometimes at night with open fires and fires under trees, and we get all of that. But there is no overnight solution for this, so I want to make sure that we understand that the team of people that presented last night at council did an exceptional job of explaining the situation and explaining how in a lot of ways their hands are tied. So we just have to pay more attention to the answers, because one of the things that I thought about last night when watching all of this was that all these councillors that are criticizing the process, none of them are bringing actual solutions. They're just criticizing and pointing fingers. We need to stop doing that and work together. Yes, the provincial and federal government have a huge part in all this. And I won't comment on that part because I'm not versed in what needs to happen on their end. What I paid attention to is the limitations of our own city council and our own city administration to do the work. They're doing the best that they can. But this is a way bigger issue than just Thunder Bay.
All right, well said, John. And I guess we wait for a report to come toward the end
June
of June.
24th is the next one. So that's your roundup. Meeting wrapped up at 12:15 and the Leafs won.
There you have it. For a full recap of the City Council Roundup, you'll be able to find it on our website, 999thebay.ca. And another reminder as well, nice and convenient, very easy for you. Just text the word council in just a bit, the word council to 807-344-8229. You'll get a direct link. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Danny.